Al-Aqsa Mosque, Jerusalem, the third holiest site in Islam, and a place of intense conflict between Israelis and Palestinians.
But Israel is an occupying power. If it can get away with things, then it will do them.
Their central intention has been to occupy Masjid al-Aqsa, and they're trying to create the political atmosphere and understanding in the world that it belongs to them.
It means beginning of the end of the state of Israel, because this meaning waging a holy war.
It's not just a Palestinian issue, it's not just a Muslim issue, but it's a global human rights issue.
Jerusalem has long been a place of religious significance to all three monotheistic faiths. The city stands upon some of the most contested land in the world.
The only masjid mentioned by name in the Holy Quran that makes it central to the Islamic belief and ties Muslims towards Jerusalem.
It is also considered to be the third mosque in Islam to which Muslims are ordered to travel, to visit. No other shrine, no other place of worship is as important as these three mosques. In the first place comes the one in Mecca, in the second place the one in Medina, and in the third place the one in Jerusalem.
First and foremost, it's linked to the great prophets that are mentioned in the Holy Quran and to which Muslims adhere very closely to. So we have Prophet Dawood, Suleiman, Musa, Isa. All of these prophets are linked to Jerusalem and Masjid al-Aqsa. And of course, it culminates in Prophet ﷺ through his attending al-Aqsa himself physically. And the fact that the Prophet ﷺ himself made the miraculous journey, the night journey, from Mecca to Jerusalem and then heavens, known as Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, that brings Jerusalem to the central fold of Islam and towards Muslims. And hence, Jerusalem becomes the central pivotal point in Islamic civilization.
Historically, Al-Aqsa Mosque and the sanctuary in which it stands has been a flashpoint for conflict. In September 2000, Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, accompanied by a 1,000-strong security force, entered the Al-Aqsa compound and declared, "The Temple Mount is in our hands." Under Sharon's leadership, settlement construction had grown. At a meeting of settlers, he announced, "Everybody has to move, run and grab as many hilltops as they can." Sharon's visit to Al-Aqsa was viewed by many Palestinians as deeply provocative. The following day, outside Al-Aqsa Mosque, Israeli forces opened fire on unarmed Palestinian protesters. 7 civilians were killed and over 100 more were wounded. Demonstrations spread throughout the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The Israeli state continued to respond with live ammunition. After 4 years, over 2,800 Palestinians had been killed and tens of thousands injured. Israel had destroyed more than 3,700 homes and imprisoned more than 7,300 people. Al-Aqsa Mosque is currently under the guardianship of Jordan, but in recent months the Israeli parliament has debated a bill that proposes application of Israeli sovereignty over Al-Aqsa. Transference of custody from Jordan to Israel would be viewed by many as an attack on not just Palestinians, but upon Muslims worldwide.
Jordan has been given the sponsorship of the Al-Aqsa Mosque because before 1967 and from 1950 till 67, the Jordanian Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan was basically in control of the West Bank and Gaza was in control by Egypt until the 6 Days War, when Israel occupied the territories. So the Muslim sites in Jerusalem has continued to be under the Awqaf system, the religious endowment system, which was controlled by the Jordanians. And even with the Israelis coming, in controlling the occupied territories, including East Jerusalem, which they declared unilaterally their eternal capital, Jordan kept the mandate, the sponsorship, the trusteeship of the Al-Haram Sharif and Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Since 1967, since the Israelis occupied East Jerusalem, their central intention has been to occupy Masjid al-Aqsa, and they're trying to create a political atmosphere and understanding in the world that it belongs to them. And this had measures to test the reaction of the global community. What would they do? So they occasionally storm the masjid to see what's going to happen in the international community. They propose certain bills to see what the international community, how it reacts. And of course, if the international community remains silent, then it makes it much more possible and probable for the Israeli authorities then to take over control.
Access to the mosque is controlled by Israeli security forces. Palestinians, particularly young men, are frequently stopped from entering the compound, and arrests are commonplace. Israel says that the restrictions are necessary in order to prevent possible violent clashes from breaking out.
There are restrictions on certain ages. Sometimes people below the age of 40 or below the age of 50 are not allowed to even come close to the mosque. Roadblocks, barricades, total closure of roads accessible or making it possible for people to access Jerusalem from different parts is also another problem. Even Arabs who have Israeli citizenship, who usually came from what we call the 1948 Palestine, have been restricted, and some of their top leaders like Sheikh Ra'ed Salah and others have been completely banned from entering into Al-Aqsa Mosque.
How can they even get to their place of worship? Without going through checkpoints and getting searched, and men and women equally are getting searched, and there are further restrictions just to go to a place of worship. If this happened in the United Kingdom, there would be an absolute outcry. People would be protesting daily. But imagine somebody in London wanting to go to a church and being searched, photographed, having their ID card being absolutely scrutinized for going to a place of worship.
Many times you have seen pictures of thousands of people, praying the Friday, group prayer outside the Haram because the Israelis won't allow them to go into the Haram. Now, the problem is that by sheer force, the Israelis, have controlled all the gates to the Haram. And they control who goes in, who goes out. And that also, of course, is considered to be, something that instigates, people who are faithful, who want to practice their religion, and are being denied for security reasons that are unjustifiable and undefined.
Israeli government and Israeli establishment has kept a blind eye whenever Jewish extremists tried to storm into the mosque and provoke Muslims and Arabs, etc. All sorts of restrictions have been placed as if to pave the way for a complete takeover of the mosque.
The mosque has been the site of frequent raids during which the Israeli settlers are often accompanied by Israeli security forces and have repeatedly forced their way into the Al-Aqsa complex. Such violations have led and will inevitably lead to violent confrontation.
Other politicians in other parts of the Muslim world may also use the same phrase the Jordanians used, red line, but Israel has been crossing red lines for the past 70 years or so. This is paying lip service. It's not going to really make much difference. Jordan has a peace agreement with Israel.
Well, of course, they should take the pivotal role. As nation states, they have a much greater clout. They have the political instruments at their disposal. But unfortunately, history has shown that they haven't been doing what they should be doing. and the fact that we have had a lot of rhetorics from a lot of Middle East leadership, yet it is not translated in any actions on the grounds. We have all these states still having great economic ties with Israel, they have diplomatic ties with Israel, and we would like to see those severed.
Governments have always really been willing to give away rights of their populations. They're more concerned with persecuting opponents, suppressing the populations. And that's why the Arab masses welcomed the Arab Spring when the Arab Spring first blew across the region. They were hoping that the Arab Spring would change those tyrannical regimes that have consolidated their relationship with Zionism and with Israel at the expense of the Arab masses. And when in some Arab countries the Arab Spring succeeded in toppling these tyrannical regimes, we started seeing counter-revolutions funded by other tyrannical regimes like the UAE and Saudi Arabia.
It's not like here when you want to pray, you go to church, you go to mosque, it's all open. Nobody asks you your ID or whether you're Christian or Muslim or Jewish. You know, these are places for worship. There shouldn't be any kind of impediments for people to go and pray. It's total humiliation, total forcing people to be subservient, total control, showing off who is in control. And this is the reflection of how power politics is being reflected by sheer force to assume sovereignty that has not been on the ground acceptable, neither by the Palestinians nor by the international community.
Tensions at Al-Aqsa are often viewed as a microcosm of the wider Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Across the West Bank, a system of illegal settlements, checkpoints and settler-only roads carve up Palestinian land. The separation wall has cut off whole villages and restricted the movement of residents.
Israel has been, throughout since its occupation, has used a policy of trying to have minimum number of Palestinian and maximum amount of Palestinian land. And they're trying to use several means to deport the Palestinians or ethnically cleanse them. First and foremost is by house demolitions. So any Palestinians whose house has been built without a permit, the Israelis use that excuse to demolish their house, and once the house is demolished, the Palestinians become refugees. They have to move out of the region. Second is revocation of ID cards. So Palestinians have to carry identification cards of which area they're living in. So Palestinians living in East Jerusalem have a blue card. And if for some reason the Israeli authority feels that Palestinians cannot prove the center of their life as East Jerusalem, then the card is revoked.
Many friends of mine for the last 13, 14 years could not cross from Bethlehem to go to Jerusalem and pray in Al-Aqsa Mosque. By the same token, many Christians who live in Beit Jala, Beit Lahem, Beit Sahur cannot go and pray in the Holy Sepulchre because they need special permits to enter Jerusalem. And this is what we consider apartheid. When you start, building walls, when you start building settlements, when you start, prohibiting people from moving, the sense of mobility is very important. When you see your land is totally dissected and separated by walls, by barricades, by cement and what have you, that in itself is a good reflection of what kind of an occupation this is all about. It's an apartheid occupation.
In 1967, following the Six-Day War, Israel seized control of the entire West Bank, including East Jerusalem. In East Jerusalem, the Israeli government implemented a policy of what has been referred to as Judaization. Palestinian homes were demolished and whole neighborhoods evicted in order to make way for Israeli settlers. On the 30th of July 1980, the Israeli Knesset passed a law declaring Jerusalem in its entirety as the capital of Israel. The United Nations Security Council passed a resolution declaring the bill a violation of international law, but no concrete action was taken against the Israeli state. Each year on Jerusalem Day, Israelis commemorate the day in 1967 that Israeli forces took control of the old city. State ceremonies and parades celebrate what many Palestinians view as the illegal occupation of their capital city.
Jerusalem is a red line. Without Jerusalem, you're talking about a body without a heart. This much I can tell you.
Al-Aqsa remains at the heart of ongoing conflict in Palestine. Sovereignty of the mosque and of the city of Jerusalem will undoubtedly be a decisive feature of any prospective peace settlement. But opinion on how a lasting peace for Jerusalem and for Palestine could be reached remains divided.
That negotiations is the ultimate way out. I believe peace should be strategy for both, and I believe in the final analysis, Israel would realize that the only legitimacy for its being in the Middle East is going to be through the Palestinians and through the recognition of Palestinians' right to statehood.
Only people who have entered into partnership with Israelis believe that armed struggle is futile. You tell me, where in history or in the world has a people been able to liberate themselves from foreign occupation without armed struggle? But armed struggle depends on capability, depends on resources.
The old city of Jerusalem is at the center of the Palestinian and Muslim identity. The erosion of Muslim historic and religious rights to the area should be of concern to all who struggle for equality and human rights. The occupation of Palestine is now 66 years old. Under UN Resolution 194, Palestinian refugees have the right to return to their homes. But illegal Israeli settlement expansion continues, and construction of the separation wall grows. Israel argues that such measures are necessary for security reasons, but the international community widely recognizes the discrimination and oppression of the Palestinian population as a form of collective punishment. One thing is for certain: the Palestinian people must have justice. Until their right to self-determination is recognized, there can be no peace in Jerusalem or the Middle East.